I have to say this is WJZ and WJZ FM New York.
And we're going to have a wonderful time with William Carlos Williams because I've been talking about him on this program for years.
This is just to say I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet and so cold.
Now, what I want to ask you about that, what makes that a poem? Because it's the kind of thing that almost anybody might say.
Yes, because no one believes that poetry can exist in his own life.
I don't say that I have succeeded, but that you can, by arranging the words, make a poem out of anything, provided you have conceived it, you have seen it in your life, because the purpose of the artist, whatever it is to take the life which he sees and raise it up to an elevated position where it has dignity.
Say it. No ideas, but in things.
What I had in mind was simply having you talk about the problems of being a doctor and being a poet.
Yes, I see.
And perhaps start by telling how you got to be a doctor and a poet.
Well, you want me to begin way back?
Begin way back.
Well, all right, I was born. That's where we begin usually. Born right in Rutherford.
It was a rather quiet little town. It wasn't rural in any sense. It was near enough to New York that a lot of people, nice people, lived in Rutherford and commuted by car or by bus to New York City.
My father was born in England, and, well, switched to mother. She was born in Puerto Rico. That's the way it begins. I have one brother. We were both born here. I went to Horace Mann High School in New York City. My brother and I commuted from here, taking the 7:16 train every morning for the 3 years that I went there, taking the Chambers Street ferry. Taking the 6th or 9th Avenue L, riding up to 116th or 125th Street, and getting to Horace Mann High School on Morningside Heights in time for the 9 o'clock bell.
Do you think that your mother had a great deal to do with your finally choosing writing?
I don't think Mother had anything to do with it. She had a lot to do with my choosing medicine. Mm-hmm. Her brother was a doctor. The Carlos in my name is from her brother.
This is an old photograph of the Williams group in Rutherford. There's Pop and Nana and the two boys, Edgar and Willie. The second one is a group in the back of the same house, the back porch. To the right we have Grandpa Williams, Dad's father. I'm in the picture there as a little boy, about 1916, 1917. I'm about 2 or 3 years old. And we come to Dad and his mother, taken here at Nine Ridge Road in the dining room. Nana Williams looks her usual grumpy self. Nothing ever pleased her. Things were too hot, things were too cold, her makeup was wrong, her hair was mussed, so they took her picture.
Do you want to hear my first poem?
Yes.
A black, black cloud flew over the sun, driven by fierce flying rain. That gave me the greatest satisfaction. But then I thought to myself, well, how absolutely stupid. Rain doesn't drive clouds. You see, so I was born a critic and a poet at the same moment. It made me throw 9/10 of my stuff away.
There were two slightly business streets which had each about 6 or 8 stores on them. And one of those stores was the drugstore, somebody's drugstore, where Bill had arranged to have published his first poems 1906. And these poems were of an awfulness that is now hard to understand. They sound like Keats, only they aren't good Keats.
When I was younger, it was plain to me I must make something of myself. Older now, I walk back streets, admiring the houses of the very poor, roof out of line with sides, the yards cluttered with old chicken wire, ashes, furniture gone wrong, the fences and outhouses built of barrel staves and parts of boxes, all, if I'm fortunate, smeared a bluish green that, properly weathered, pleases me best of all colors. No one will believe this of vast import to the nation.
This is one of those poems that really encourages a poet to write about things that he really sees. This also has a very nice, cluttery, clanky sound. Roof out of line with sides, the yards cluttered with chicken wire, ashes, furniture gone wrong, the fences and outhouses built of barrel staves and parts of boxes. It's a very nice sound, which really wasn't in poetry before. All this stuff was considered ugly. Chicken wire, ashes. Why don't you say something nice, Dr. Williams?
I'm a radical. I write modern poetry, baby. I'm an awful person.
He realized that the English poetry that he'd been copying in school was not for him, and that it wouldn't suit to express the modern public. He wanted then to write an American idiom, a poetry which would sound like the speech of American people talking.
At the bar. Hi, open up a dozen. What you trying to do? Charge your batteries? Make it 2. Easy, girl. It'll blow a fuse if you keep that up.
He'd come in all times, day and night, and go to his desk here in this room and type. And my kid brother and I would hear him. Bang, 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 bang. We went to sleep with that, and we woke up with that. He was a guy who needed very little sleep, very little rest. Creatively inspired at all times. He always had something to say.
What the typewriter does is it removes your handwriting from the poem and allows the words to stand more neutrally for themselves.
Once he began using the typewriter, he fell in love with it and used it extensively, and much of his visual form of the poem on the page comes from the use of the typewriter.
As the cat climbed over the top of the jam closet, first the right forefoot carefully, then the hind stepped down into the pit of the empty flower pot.
He's a master of line breaks, and one of the things when you look at his manuscripts is to see from draft to draft how he plays around with where he should end the line.
The principle is mindfulness itself of the arrangement of the verse form on the page, however you do it, with many different considerations, whether it be consideration of how did it look when you originally wrote it down, how did it look in your head when you conceived the phrasing, how did it look when you spoke it, how does it sound when you break it up by the breath, how does it sound when you break it up by idea.
Between walls, the back wings of the hospital where nothing will grow lie cinders in which shine the broken pieces of green bottle. You can break this up a lot of ways when you read it, but it always breaks up like speech.
He had this predisposition to create an American poetry, and he had also such a good ear for the way people talked and for speech.
To greet a letter carrier. Why don't you bring me a good letter, one with lots of money, and I can make use of it. Attaboy, attaboy. I think that poetry comes out of the language that is spoken on the street.
And as he begins to listen to the rhythms of American speech, or English American speech, he begins to sort out from that what he feels are the measures that are inherent in it, and then those measures join with the images that he's discovering.
I was intrigued with Pound and Williams, but I couldn't understand what they were doing. So I asked a local newspaper if I could represent myself as a reporter and go interview Williams around 1948 or 49. And so I went to his house, and then I didn't understand his poetry. I didn't know how to read it. And among the questions I asked him was, does he think of himself as a poet or as a doctor? And he said, as a doctor, which cut through my romanticism, but was a really practical answer.
You see, I am a physician, and I've practiced a long time, and I've seen many people die. And I've seen them die when they needn't have died, and I know what it means to the family and to those about them. No, I'm not trying to get maudlin over that, but that happens every day, and it's a good thing if a man has some relief from that. Every day I'd write at least 8 or 10 lines, sometimes 3 or 4 lines. With the back of a prescription blank and a good pencil in my hand, I could write anything I was capable of.
Complaint. They call me and I go.
The phone rang at all hours of the night, and he would be jangled out of sleep, and he would go. And in the dead of winter, it was frequently quite a problem. It is a frozen road past midnight.
It is a frozen road past midnight, a dust of snow caught in the rigid wheel tracks.
The door opens. I smile, enter, and shake off the cold. Here is a great woman on her side in the bed. She is sick, perhaps vomiting, perhaps laboring to give birth to a 10th child.
She is sick, perhaps vomiting, perhaps laboring to give birth to a 10th child. Joy, joy. And then he thinks about making love and the joy of that, and what it ends up with. This woman has had 10 children, is vomiting.
You get the feeling it would be as much of a joy if he found her vomiting with some illness as finding her giving birth to a 10th child. The poem then moves to this extraordinarily tender statement. Night is a room darkened for lovers. Whatever is happening in that room, it is a place of love.
Night is a room darkened for lovers. Through the jalousies the sun has sent one gold needle. I pick up the hair from her eyes and watch her misery with compassion.
I don't like the person who takes a poor guy and soaks his wife $250 for a cesarean section when he hasn't even enough to eat.
Most of Bill's patients in Rutherford were poor people because the rich people in the town could not believe that a doctor could be any good if he wrote poetry.
To a poor old woman munching a plum on the street, a paper bag of them in her hand. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. You can see it by the way she gives herself to the one half sucked out in her hand. Comforted, a solace of ripe plums seeming to fill the air. They taste good to her. It's a very bold poem in that he does something so simple, and it could have been such a drastic failure, and yet we're still learning about the line by looking at this particular poem.
They taste good to her. They taste good to her. They taste good to her.
And we learn also about the poor old woman. We learn also about how to write about a street person, perhaps. Now she would certainly be a street person. With dignity.
You drunken, tottering bum, By Christ, in spite of all your filth and sordidness, I envy you. It is the very face of love itself, abandoned in that powerless committal to despair.
Bill, when he was young, he did some pretty good paintings. I think his interest in art perhaps began, or at least was strengthened, by his visits to the Armory Show of 1913. And there he found, as so many others found, and was completely bowled over by, the first large-scale exhibition in America of painters of the new school. That awakened him to a new kind of painting, which would be, in his mind, like a new kind of poetry. And through friends, he came to meet other young American painters like Demuth and like Sheeler. He became friends with them. He spent often, if he could get into New York on weekends, he would meet up with them and they would have long discussions.
His Friday afternoons were sacred. He'd go to New York. He went to New York to be with his fellow artists, talking with people, corresponding with people, rubbing elbows with people in the city. You could be there in 15 minutes driving, you could be there in half an hour on the train. So I knew from the beginning there was something peculiar about him, besides the fact that he was a pill pusher, yeah.
A powerhouse in the shape of a red brick chair 90 feet high, on the seat of which sit the figures of two metal stacks, aluminum, commanding an area of squalid shacks side by side, from one of which buff smoke streams, while under a gray sky the other remains passive today.
What is seen is of the American landscape, the American industrial landscape, and that is what gives the thing its force, that it deals with America.
While walking one evening in New York during a rainstorm with his friend Charles Demuth, my father experienced this scene. This is a fire engine in New York City, number 5, howling through the streets, and he wrote a poem about it. And it goes like this: the great figure among the rain and lights, I saw the figure 5 in gold on a red fire truck, moving, tense, unheeded, to gong clangs, siren howls, and wheels rumbling through the dark city.
He's already living in the age of the airplane, of the advanced locomotive, of the automobile has begun, the radio has begun. Cubism is taking place in the arts. Something very big is going on.
Sketch for a portrait of Henry Ford. A tin bucket full of small used parts, nuts and short bolts, slowly draining onto the dented bottom, forming a heavy sludge of oil, depositing in its turn steel grit, hangs on an arm that whirls it at increasing velocity around a central pivot. Suddenly the handle gives way and the bucket is propelled through space. The description of this is very, very good, I think, that full of small used parts, nuts and short bolts. If he'd said nuts and bolts, it would be very boring because that's a cliche, but he makes you see, for the first time he made me think about a short bolt. What have you got there? A short bolt. Slowly, he even pays attention to that, slowly draining How quickly are the nuts and short bolts draining? Slowly. I don't think anyone's ever paid any attention to that, except for reasons of efficiency. But Williams is looking at it the way he'd look at a dance.
When I say there's nothing sentimental about a poem, I mean that there can be no part, as in any other machine, that is redundant.
I have to say this is WJZ and WJZ FM New York.
He says he can't read any poems because he doesn't know them by heart. I'll bet you know some of those little ones, don't you?
A very little one, you mean?
Yes, let's hear a very little one. That's an awful...
Well, there is one called The Red Wheelbarrow that people seem to enjoy. So much depends upon the red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens.
Good for you. That's the poem.
I wrote that, and then, of course, I sat down to think about it.
And what did you think?
What did I think? I wondered what it meant.
Say it. No ideas, but in things.
I think people love the Red Wheelbarrow poem because it seems to be such a simple and striking example of no ideas but in things. It's a very radical poem.
In the climate of its time, it was like a revolutionary statement. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. It's like the painting white on white or something, or some crazy thing by Picasso that people thought was crazy at the time. Like, what's that? My 3-year-old could do better than that. This is just gives you very ordinary kind of subject matter and is talked about in a very plain way.
The phrase, no ideas but in things, is one of the great slogans or pith instructions of 20th century American poetry. What it means, basically, is that it is important to present your ideas through the medium of things observed that represent the ideas.
April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain.
The wasteland wiped out our world as if an atom bomb had been dropped upon it, and our brave sallies into the unknown were turned to dust. There's a letter here from Dad to Ezra Pound. Maybe I'm wrong, but I distrust that bastard more than any writer I know in the world today. He can write, granted, but it's like walking into a church to me. I can't do it without a bad feeling at the pit of my stomach.
Spring and All is definitely a kind of riposte to the wasteland, and the emphasis on rebirth is a kind of almost defiance on his part that his kind of poem will be enter into the world.
By the road to the contagious hospital, under the surge of the blue mottled clouds driven from the northeast, a cold wind. Beyond, the waste of broad, muddy fields, brown with dried weeds, standing and fallen.
Beyond the waste of broad, muddy fields, brown with dried weeds, standing and fallen patches of standing water, the scattering of tall trees.
There's no verb here, as if we're waiting for the push of spring to provide that verb.
All along the road, the reddish, purplish, forked, upstanding, twiggy stuff of bushes and small trees with dead brown leaves under them, leafless vines. Lifeless in appearance, sluggish, dazed spring approaches. Here we have this, to me, image of birth And then surely, when you reach the lines, they enter the new world naked, cold, uncertain of all save that they enter. This is about human beings as well as about leaves.
They enter the new world naked, cold, uncertain of all save that they enter. All about them the cold, familiar wind. Now the grass, tomorrow the stiff curl of wild carrot leaf, and one by one objects are defined.
One by one objects are defined. It quickens, clarity, outline of leaf. This is terrific and very dramatic. It's like a speeded up movie that sort of shows you a flower growing or the grass growing. But now, then he stops again. But now the stark dignity of entrance.
But now the stark dignity of entrance. Still, the profound change has come upon them. Rooted, they grip down and begin to awaken.
So he keeps us in this one moment of transition and ends the poem not with something rising out of the earth visible, but as the thing which precedes that. Rooted, they grip down and begin to awaken.
But on April 12, 1961, the Soviet Union climaxed its spectacular space achievements when Major Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin was launched into orbit around the Earth.
Gagarin says, in ecstasy, he could have gone on forever. He floated, ate, and sang, and when he emerged from that, 108 minutes off the surface of the Earth, he was smiling.
He returned to the greatest celebration in the history of the Soviet Union.
Then he returned to take his place among the rest of us. From all that division and subtraction, a measure. Toe and heel. Heel and toe, he felt as if he had been dancing.
We must salute him for his terrific concentration on his work, and at the same time be sorry for the penalty which he had to pay for it, which was the strokes and heart attacks which began to hit him in his later life.
I don't have to take care of myself. I have to do what I have to do, and that I'll do right to the end. And I hope it'll be good.
One reason why I myself continue to turn back to Williams is simply that he is a great poet. He was not just an instrument for turning the language to a new diction or a new way of making poems. The poems themselves stand. They continue to illuminate, they continue to engage, they continue to surprise. No one has bettered what he did.
It's something that's an art done by the seat of the pants, by human heartbeat and value, rather than by arithmetical measurement or mechanical measurement. In that sense, closer to one's own nervous system.
He keeps fresh as if he were in the icebox. His words to me never date.
Dr. William Carlos Williams, what's it all about?
Well, how can I answer that?
I know.
All I can say is work. All I have to do is do what I have to do and let it go carelessly. Let it go. Whatever happens to it, that's for somebody else to decide. I don't care.
Ah, you're wonderful.
I have to say this is WJZ and WJZ FM New York.